flu and stuff that's going around. And so, Lord, we ask tonight, though, Lord, that you would be blessed because you're the one we're talking about. It's you who helped this nation to become a nation. It's you who directed our paths. It's you who supernaturally came against the enemy in all forms, not just those of Great Britain, but the French, some of the American Indian tribes, um, the Germans, as we'll see tonight, mercenaries from all over the world that just kind of during this period of time went all over the world looking for wars in which they could make money off of. So you protected us from all of that. And we thank you and we praise you in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so I need George and two other volunteers. Here's what I need. I need someone that can remember any one of the three little little ways that I'm teaching you to remember A, B, C. So A is Thomas Prince, B is George Washington, and C is Henry Knox. Who can remember the what? Yeah, come on up here, Judy. That's good. All right, I'm going to let you off the hook then. So what was that one? Yes, that's number two. So answer to prayer that saved the American colonies, uh, bravery on the battlefield, George Washington, and then what was last week? Yes, well, courage, creativity, and a cannons, and a whole lot of cannons, right? And that was the story of Henry Knox. And that's probably of the three, no, I would say two of the three, the majority of people have never heard of. Thomas Prince and Henry Knox, for the majority of people, have never heard of them. Although Henry Knox, who I call good as gold, because Fort Knox, which maintained the gold for at least a number of years here, was named after him. And that's because, as we saw last week, the position of esteem that George Washington had for him. Now, I promised last week that we would do two things tonight. First, we're going to talk about an appeal to heaven, how that came to be. Because actually, when you look at it, what you really need to see is this is the answer that the colonists gave on why it was a righteous thing to enter into the declaring of war against Great Britain. Okay? And even to this day, a lot of Christians stumble there. I mean, think of groups like the Quakers that won't go to war. Okay? So the concept of looking at it biblically or theologically, there's still a lot of folks that, well, and there's some cults that won't do it too, that have difficulty. And even if they might be supportive of a war effort, they might deep down inside kind of, look at it askance because of the fact that we were a colony, we were allowed to be here by Great Britain. A lot of them had, as we saw last week, a lot of loyalists were here. They were still loyal when the American Revolution was going on. We'll see that is one of the miracles tonight. Because actually, so what I'm saying is that, excuse me, what's going on in this period of time is not just the Americans against Great Britain. You had other things going on at the same time, including the British loyalists. But the concept of what gave the founding fathers the belief that it was a righteous thing, not just a thing, but a righteous thing to war with Great Britain is right there in Appeal to Heaven. Okay? And so I shared last week that we'd talk about that first. We did share that basically George Washington introduced it as a flag, but not as a theory, not as a biblical thought, because it actually goes back to 1690. One could say it goes back to the creation of the Bible, but actually in terms of what we call a political document or doctrine, it goes back to 1690 to the writer of the two treatises on government, John Locke, okay, who is English. So here our guys are going to use the English author to war against England. Isn't that great? Okay, but he presents it, so we want to take a look at that tonight, and then we'll get into the miracles. And by the way, so interesting, because the battle that we're going to talk about tonight, I've talked about it multiple times over the years. But interestingly, since my last time doing it, and then further research this time, it wasn't interesting that a new miracle happened, or they have found through writings the attesting to another miracle that happened during this battle, to make three in a 24-hour period. What will be crucial about that is the fact that this battle happened about 3 months after Dorchester Heights, when the English sailed back home. Okay, within 3 months they're going to now come back for this battle, and this will be the largest battle in the American Revolution. This is the number one in terms of troops involved, and it should have been a wipeout. The English had it. Not only were they wiping out the Americans, but they should have won it, and there would be no United States of America today. It's that simple, except for divine providence. George Washington writes about it. His secretary of, I think, was the logistics or something, he writes about it. Others have written about it. So that's what we want to talk about. But first of all, let's take a look here at this, the flag. As I said, George Washington made it a flag, first flag of America. It was on the our Navy, which was 6 ships. Okay, our naval group was 6 ships, and this was the flag that flew over it. He chose that, and as I said, the thought, the concept, the writings about it, they were prevalent. It was used all the time. We'll see that. I'll give you a couple of them in just a little bit. But it was so dominant was John Locke as a writer, as a philosophical thinker, that this was quoted more than any other person during that time. Sure, in the 1750s and 60s up to the 70s, it was John Locke they were quoting. As a matter of fact, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Richard Henry Lee, once quipped that the Declaration, quote, had been largely copied from Locke's treatise on government. So that's how much of an influence John Locke had, okay? In Locke's second treatise, he uses the biblical story of Jephthah. And he does this, I think it's 5 different times he refers back to Jephthah. That's Judges chapter 11. We won't read the chapter. I think you probably are familiar with the story, but if not, I'll repeat it right now. And that is that the Jephthah, who's now a judge over Israel, if you recall, Jephthah had a not a great introduction. His father was the king, and he was out there doing his thing, and so Jephthah was born out of wedlock. His brothers and sisters kicked him out of the house, so he had to move out of the country. No one came to his aid. They just chided him, along with the family about this. He's never going to make anything of himself. But when the Ammonites came against this part of Israel in Gilead, it was they were getting wiped out, and so they came and looked up Jephthah because they heard that he was a man now of a military renown, and so they contacted him and asked him to come and be their head, and he responded, "Well, why are you asking me this? Why do you want me to come and lead you into battle when you were of the chorus against me?" And so Jephthah's response to that, the Gileadites' response to that is, "If you will lead us into this battle, we'll make you head over our whole group, our whole area, Gilead." And so he says, "Okay, I'll do it." So he writes to the Ammonites and he says, "Why are you coming and warring against us in our own land?" And that's what opens it up. The Ammonites write back and say, "It's not your land. You stole it from us once you came up out of Egypt." Okay, well, the actual way that it worked was the Israelites, we're talking about hundreds of years before, Israelites came out of Egypt and then had to go in war against these groups, including the Amorites, who had this land. But who was the land promised to? Yeah, to Abraham. Okay, it's a promise to Abraham. They're going to war and win the battles so that they can inherit this land. And so Jephthah then writes back and he says, "Your history is flawed. This is what really happened. This is why it's ours. And why didn't you complain about this 300 years ago when we defeated the Amorites for this land that you claim was yours before that? You have no right to it whatsoever." And so they entered into this argument. And finally, Jephthah comes to the point where he says, this is not going to end through any kind of discussion. He said, basically, he will then and this is what Locke will quote, verse 27 of Judges 11. He's going to say that there comes a time in human events when there's no um, power greater than those that are involved in a conflict like this, that since there's no superior to go to, you have to go to God and leave it in God's hands. So there's two things that come about in an appeal to heaven. Number one, you're at the point where you're going to go to war. Locke was not for war. He felt that was a last result. But there will come a time in affairs of men, between nations, in nations, when the only thing that's going to solve it is war. That's element number one. Element number two is we appeal to God and say, Lord, I believe that we have a righteous cause, but we're going to leave it in your hands. We're going to battle. You decide it. Okay? So that's where we were at the end of 1775, where this appears. We were at the point where we had sent emissaries and documents to the throne, to England, asking them to either change something they were doing here in America or get rid of it completely, and we were getting no positive redress at all. And so the founders wrote the Declaration of Independence with 27 gripes, okay, to England, okay. So that's basically, what we're dealing with here. And so when this shows up, George Washington knew skirmishes are already happening, okay, in a town because of heavy-handed people that were emissaries from England and they were in government positions here. It would cause skirmishes. People would, the Boston Tea Party, things like that. And so it was already going on, but it got to a point where they just knew we needed to declare our independence. We need to go to war and leave it in God's hands. Now I gave you, let me just go right down to here to what John Locke writes concerning Jephthah. Quote, this is written in, remember, 1690. I asked Mickey if he was alive during that time in the first service. He says, no, he wasn't there yet. Jephthah made his appeal to heaven. No, this is quoting John Locke. Jephthah made his appeal to heaven, and had there been any such court, any superior jurisdiction on earth to determine the right between Jephthah and the Ammonites, they had never come to a state of war. But we see he was forced to appeal to heaven. Quote, and then he quotes verse 27, may the Lord the judge render judgment this day between the children of Israel and the children of Ammon. In other words, appeal to heaven. God, we're fighting over this. It's up to you to decide. Is everybody with me? It's really pretty straightforward. Locke looked upon war, as I said, as a last resort. And then he made this comment. When the people of a country, quote, have no appeal on earth, then they have a liberty to appeal to heaven whenever they judge the cause of sufficient importance. This biblical solution to solve the issues of unsolvable differences greatly influenced our founding fathers. How many remember the Patrick Henry speech, give me liberty or give me death? Okay, everybody's familiar with that historically, right? Well, this is the conclusion of that message that Patrick Henry gave. Quote, if we wish to be free, if we mean to preserve inviolate those inestimable privileges for which we have been so long contended, if we mean not basely to abandon the noble struggle in which we have been so long engaged, and which we have pledged ourselves never to abandon, we must fight. I repeat it, sir, we must fight. An appeal to arms and to the God of hosts is all that is left us. So you see the two elements there. If I change that, I could say this. We must fight an appeal to arms and an appeal to heaven. An appeal to arms and an appeal to the God of hosts. Do you see? That's what he's saying there. It's those two elements. When you are at a place that you are there's nothing else you could do. There's nothing else that you can do. You have to stand up for what you know is righteous and right. Also, Jonathan Trumbull, who we heard last week, one of his quotes, governor of Connecticut, stated, quote, on the 19th day of April, 1775, the scene of blood was opened by the British troops. By the unprovoked slaughter of the provincial troops at Lexington and Concord, the adjacent colonies took up arms in their own defense, And the Congress again met, again petitioned the throne for peace and settlement. And again, their petitions were contemptuously disregarded. When every glimpse of hope failed, not only of justice, but of safety, we were compelled by the last necessity to appeal to heaven and rest the defense of our liberties and privileges upon the favor and protection of divine providence, and the resistance we could make by opposing force to force. See the two elements there? Okay, we went back to England even after they slaughtered our troops, okay, at Concord. Even though that happened, we still sent out the fig leaf there, whatever you call it, to say, please, we've got to work this out. And Great Britain wanted nothing to do with that. Thus, the flying of an appeal to heaven flag bore great meaning to our founders, who were willing to give up their lives and allow God to decide if, quote, their cause was just. So when you look at that, you're looking at the reason why our Christian forebears felt it was a legitimate thing, a righteous thing, to stand up to Great Britain, declare independence, and put it all on the line. We're going to let God solve this. We believe we're right. They believe they're right. Okay? So we're going to go fight force against force, but we're asking you, Lord, to rule on our behalf. And then whoever was closest to what God was calling righteous, they just rested on that. Okay. Excuse me. Now let's go to the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. Less than 4 months after the British retreat to England from Dorchester Heights, that was last week, that was March 17th, 1776. So on March 17th, the English left, remember, because of the miracle with Henry Knox and him getting all those 59 cannons, and then they took trees and made them look like cannons. So it finally, then the storm wrecked part of the English fleet out there, and so they decided, we're going home. We'll be back another day. So on March 17th, 1776, the English left, but they're coming right back. This is August now. And when they come back together with an invasion force of 32,000 troops and over 400 ships, which invaded New York Harbor. Think about that for a second. I was reading one historian wrote about what it was like to have 400 ships basically at the mouth of the New York Harbor, but they said it was like looking at a field of lumber, all the masts sticking up there. They were coming back to stop this rebellion. Remember, you have them leaving May 17th. July 4th, we declare our independence. Now it's going to be August 27th. They are back, and they're going to stop this immediately. Okay? General Washington, who's in charge of everything. Someone asked in the first service about Washington. The people saw, as we've seen, the anointing on George Washington all the way along, and they realized he was different. That as people said, he was under some divine protection. He knew he was under divine protection. He writes about it, and so they left everything in his charge. He was in charge. This is the only American army at this time. You have little splinter groups of people that will, join up eventually. But in terms of the American army, this is it. Okay? And so General Washington on May 31st, okay, wrote his brother. Now, if you think about it, May 17th, they went back to England. He's writing this as almost a warning. He knows that they went back, but they're coming back again. Okay? And so he wrote to his brother John. He writes this, quote, "We expect a very bloody summer of it at New York. We are not either in men or arms prepared for it. If our cause is just, as I do most religiously believe it to be, the same providence which has in many instances appeared for us will still go on to afford us its aid." So there it is, And again, we saw last week the introduction of George Washington and others calling for days of fasting and prayer. Examine yourself. The only thing that can save us is that if you're living a righteous life. You have no other authority going before God asking him to intervene unless you are living a righteous life. Okay? So that's what's going on here. And now he's telling his brother they're coming back. Okay. Then on July 4th, our forefathers declared independence from Great Britain. On July 9th, 5 days later, a copy of the Declaration of Independence was delivered to George Washington. He paraded his troops. He read the Declaration of Independence to his men. In the Declaration of Independence, there's 4 references that refer to God. Now you got to hear these, especially I want you to focus on the last 2. The first 2 you've heard many times. Okay, God is referred to in terms of the laws of nature, and nature's God. Number 2, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, God, with certain inalienable rights. But check out 3 and 4. 3, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. That's the appeal to heaven. He's saying, in that declaration, he's saying the third time God's referred to is we have gone to him and we've asked him to rule on our behalf because of what has been done to us. Okay? And then finally 4, firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. In other words, we're going to war. They had no doubt when they declared independence they were going to war. Okay? They're going to war. They've appealed to heaven, and they're believing that God is going to intervene for them. So you have all the elements there. We're going to go to war, but we need God's help. In August, fighting broke out on the western end of Long Island. Long Island is New York, and the specific place on Long Island is called Brooklyn Heights. It overlooks the East River, and this is where it's going to take place. On August 27th, at Brooklyn Heights, General Howe prepared to capture or destroy the remaining Americans, thus ending the revolution a month after America had declared independence. They're going to have basically, at the time of this battle, there's going to be roughly 11,000 American troops there against their 32,000. It'll quickly, as we'll see in a minute, go down to 8,000. As a matter of fact, I'll give you that right now. General Washington expected the British to land directly from the sea, as they had done at Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill is Boston. As they looked out in the water and they saw the British coming and attacking Bunker Hill, George Washington thought they would do it in the exact same manner. They did not. Instead, 10,000 of the British troops landed near Jamaica Bay, which is a day's journey away by foot, where they were led by a British loyalist. What's a British loyalist? Yes, many, many British colonists. Remember on that, talking about Henry Knox? Henry Knox's wife's parents were British loyalists, so they went back to England, right? And so there was a lot of people here that, and some for Christian reasons, feeling that it wasn't right to fight, okay, in that manner against England. You know, because it's next to the Civil War, you've got people that your family and friends and all, and you're now going to fight them, okay? Maybe not the same as Civil War where it's brother against brother, but in terms of people you know and all are represented by that British Army. Where, led by a British loyalist, they attacked the Patriots from the rear. In this first incursion, 3,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded compared to 392 of the British. So the surprise attack from the opposite way that they expected, and that was the result. So now you're down to 8,000. 32,000 minus 392 against 8,000. That's all that's left. So they are now in a process of this attack. British General Howe now had the American troops trapped with their backs to the East River, creating a great semicircle around them, cutting off all escape routes by land. Okay, so the British Army was at that time the greatest army in the world. Okay, and so they knew how to fight. They knew how to how would you say it? They knew the art of war. And so they had figured this out by the surprise attack from the back. Then they would do a semicircle around them because they only needed a semicircle because you had the East River to their back. So they also knew that Washington's only escape now is going to be to somehow get across the East River to what is present-day New York. Okay? New York City is right across the East River. The thing is, though, even though Washington's thinking in those terms, the British have 400 ships at the top of the East River. So they can simply send those ships down the East River and cut off. Now they've already cut off the escape by land. They can cut off the escape by the East River, and in so doing, they'll either, if the Americans are, quote, stupid enough to continue the battle, then they'll all be killed, just like those other 3,000. Or they'll be able to surrender. One of the two will happen in terms of that's the British psyche. That's what they're believing. That's what Washington is going to respond to. But the point being, that will end the American Revolution. There will be no revolution. It'll just be harder, meaning the English crown, the throne, will even make it more difficult on the Americans here because they attempted to rebel. Everybody with me? Okay. All right. However, unknown to Washington, the British were planning to close that route by sailing their ships up the river, taking up position behind the Americans. But, this is always, but God, okay? But, as Washington's men gathered the small crafts, a heavy storm entered the region. Rain began falling and strong winds blowing, which kept the British ships from sailing up behind them and blocking their escape. So here they're trying, their ships are ready to come in the harbor and cut off the East River, but all of a sudden a nor'easter hits and the rain and the wind, and they're out there, they can't do anything at all. Well, you can say, well then, how are the Americans even going to get across? Well, this is during the daylight. It's going to now turn pitch black at night, okay? So, first of all, the Americans will try an escape. They'll try to go across, but the weather is so bad, they can't do it. They have to halt it. Okay. Then at 11 p.m. in the pitch black of night, a gentle breeze then began to blow. In other words, the nor'easter passed, and a gentle breeze then began to blow from the south and southwest, which actually favored the Americans, allowing them to fill the boats and begin the evacuation. But as the sun began to rise, not all his troops had been evacuated. The British would surely see what they were doing and stop them. Death for the remaining Americans would be certain. But at this moment, at this moment, a dense fog descended on the river and shorelines. Now, I'm going to quote from Major Ben Talmadge, who is Washington's chief of intelligence. And this is why I said that the importance of what we're doing is I'm not giving you history from the 1940s or the 1920s or the turn of the century. I'm giving you history as reported by those that were experiencing it. See? And this is what is important, because what has been lost in our society, just think about it logically. If the enemy comes in and takes prayer, Bible study, the Ten Commandments out of our school beginning in 1962-63, if you take God out, then who's going to be reporting the history of God's miracles? It's not going to be allowed. And so it just vanished off the face of the earth. And I read 2 weeks ago, I think it was, from 100 years later of 1876, that it was still being taught in the schools. The same thing we learned about George Washington, the Battle of Monongahela, and the bullets going through his, that was all being taught. It was all being taught. Okay? But the enemy was starting to get in there in terms of coming against our society. Okay, so having that, the dense fog comes in. Major Ben Talmadge, Washington's chief of intelligence, later wrote, quote, "As the dawn of the next day approached, those of us who remained in their trenches became very anxious for our own safety. And when the dawn appeared, there were several regiments still on duty. At the time, a very dense fog began to rise off the river, and it seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments, the British and the Americans. I recollect this peculiar," here's his word, "I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well, and so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distance. We tarried until the sun had risen, but the fog remained as dense as ever." So here's the second miracle that happened that saved the Americans, okay? They're going to get everybody out. They're going to get all 8,000 troops, all of their supplies, all of their cannons, everything. They're going to get off during this period of time. Number one, because the ships couldn't come down. And number two, a dense fog made it so that they didn't think it was important to follow through. If they had known that that they were going to be getting across, they would have just increased the pace. Okay, they would have come and tried to destroy the Americans. But because it was a war, you are trying to destroy the opposition, but with the least number of casualties. So you have you use your mind to figure out when is it best to attack and so forth. The fog hovered over the area until the last American boats left, carrying the remaining troops to safety. Providentially, Washington and the Americans had been miraculously preserved and kept alive to continue the fight for freedom. In addition, miracle number 3. In addition to the miraculous timing of the storm that kept the British from sailing their ships to cut off the Americans' retreat across the East River, and the miraculous timing of a providential fog to ensure the successful evacuation of the troops, there occurred one more miraculous event. A family of British sympathizers lived near the point where the American troops were being evacuated. The lady of the house, when she learned what the Americans were doing, sent a servant to alert the British. He safely slipped past the American guards, but upon reaching the British lines was stopped by German-speaking mercenaries. Now, I mentioned earlier, mercenaries, groups of people from different countries or Indian tribes that are basically looking at these war situations. In terms of the German mercenaries, they're looking at it throughout the world. Okay, where can we go and fight? We're good fighters. We'll go and make lots of money, and then we'll be out of there. But they're not stupid. They're not going to go in and get money when they think they're going to lose the war. Okay, so the German mercenaries are with the British because they think the British are going to win the war, and the British are going to pay them a lot of money to fight on their behalf. Everybody with me? Okay. But upon reaching the British lines, the servant was stopped by German-speaking mercenaries serving the British, with whom he was unable to communicate. They, therefore, put him under guard and held him until the next morning, when a British officer finally showed up and questioned him. Upon learning the news of the American evacuation, British troops were immediately sent to confirm the report, only to find the Continental camp completely empty. The British then rushed toward the shore, arriving just as the fog lifted enough for them to see the last boats crossing the East River. And guess who was in the last boat? George Washington. Okay. Over 8,000 American soldiers and their supplies had miraculously escaped. This extraordinary retreat was one of the many remarkable events of the war, and the outcome was attributed to the direct intervention of God. Had the Americans not been able to evacuate Brooklyn Heights, the war would have ended there. Instead, the British never had such an opportunity to capture the entire American army again. General Washington later wrote, now, this happened in August of 1776. Let's go 2 years in the future. We're going to see between this date and when George Washington writes this, you're not going to have only seen the Battle of Monongahela. You're not going to have only seen Henry Knott. You're not more than Brooklyn Heights. You're going to see other battles where God intervenes. So here is in August 1778. This is what George Washington wrote. Quote, "The hand of Providence has been so conspicuous in all this, the course of the war, that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith, and more than wicked that has not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations," meaning obligations to God. So George Washington knew. I mean, he knew, he never came across as prideful, but he would always acknowledge God did it. Now, let's take a look at and by the way, I almost forgot in the first service, your memory, little help thing here, is the letter D. This is the fourth one, right? A dense fog and divine deliverance. So 3 Ds. A dense fog and divine deliverance. And the way I do it, wherever there's the D, I just capitalize it. So what this is to do is to help you to remember. Dense fog. Oh, that's the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. And a whole lot of cannons. Oh, that's Henry Knox. That's Dorchester Heights. That's where that one is. And so That's what I'm trying to do. Is why? Because this is not just an exercise of Wednesday night. I appreciate everybody coming here, both day and night. But this is something that we need to have restored in our nation. It's been stolen. It's been stolen from us. So you have so many. Yeah, the reason I believe, especially with social media, you have so many people that disregard or disrespect our founders. They all just owned slaves. They were evil people. Oh, they had their day, our days. Now we can forge our own. There's a lack of respect because it's really a lack of respect for God. A lot of Christians see themselves as a Christian relating back to Israel with nothing in between. I mean, to me, that is so shallow. That is so shallow because it's denying that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That he's still doing miracles. He does miracles in your and my life. I mean, we can give evidence as to where God showed up. And if God hadn't shown up, we might have been in a pickle, in a bad place. And if God, the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, I mentioned this on Sunday, on the plane back from D.C., I sat next to a Jewish young lady who works for, is a commentator. Well, actually, she's a anchor on AOL, America on, what is it called? America One? Yeah, American One. It's out of La Jolla. And Jewish young girl. And so I said to her, because we were just talking, and I said, think about this for a second. What would your Jewish people have been? What would it have been like for them if they did not have the Torah? See, I didn't even go with the Old Testament. I just said the Torah because that's their main book, okay, within the Old Testament. And I said, and for us as Christians, what would it have been like, especially going through persecution and all, what would it have been like for the Christian not to have the New Testament? See, just all oral tradition. Well, when you're getting slaughtered and all, you may not have the faith as a whole group to stay together. It might get splintered off by the enemy very quickly. I said, okay, so you believe in the God of the Old Testament, that he did the miracles. I believe that he also did in the New Testament. But how about if that same God that both of our groups believe in also did miracles in the founding of our nation, and yet that history is taken away from us? How is it going to be for us? I said, my response is that it's going to be exactly what you find today. You finally come to a point in the culture that because you don't have any foundation anymore. So when radicalization comes on social media and you see kids becoming radicalized, well, they've got no foundation. They don't see us connected. Oh, one nation under God, that's a term. But do you have an understanding of how wonderful and powerful God is? God has guaranteed the Old and New Testament. Heaven and earth will pass away, but the Bible will always be here, no matter who the dictator is or what the system is. But he does not guarantee that our own history will be remembered. As a matter of fact, Ecclesiastes 1:11 says the opposite. It won't be remembered. Why? Because there's a spiritual force trying to have us forget our past. Because history repeats itself. I mean, even in our own lives, the thing that when, as a Christian, we come through a bad season in life where bad things happen or we made terrible mistakes, and we come through it, and all of a sudden we say, thank you, God, that you got me through, and I never want to repeat that again. I never want to make that kind of a mistake. I don't want to make those kind of decisions. Please, God, help me never to do that again. Okay? Well, it's the same as a nation. So when all the statues were being ripped down of even founding fathers, where was the voice saying, hey, just look at the scripture. Does God take Judas out because he came against Christ? Does God take David's story with Bathsheba and rip it out? No, it's there so we'll remember what we shouldn't do. We see the good, the bad, and the ugly. History is extremely important to us, and we have to have it. So what we're doing here in this little church is we're going through these 12 Stones of Remembrance to be able to give you a whole series of miracles that you can share with others, that you can share with your kids first. Remember Joshua 4, God didn't say, okay, now you priests, you preach on Sabbath that the miracle works of God. God already covered that. It's within the feasts and everything else that happens within the Jewish faith. But what he did say is when you and your children walk by this Mount of Rocks, you remind them of what your God has done for you, the miracles that he's done. And so we find ourselves in the same position. We need to remind our children to give them a foundation, especially as social media and all's out there in schools that are going to, in many instances, not give them a healthy respect for being a Christian or being an American. I mean, I am thankful to be an American. I'm proud to be an American because we live in one nation under the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm proud of the fact that our founding fathers started this nation in 1607 on Cape Henry with a covenantal prayer, entering into covenant with God for what was going to be happening for the generations to come. It's just we've gotten away from that because the foundation's been ripped out and people are just swimming in the water without any kind of foundation. And what does the scripture say? Be careful lest you be blown about by every wind of doctrine. What's the latest philosophy that comes across? Who's the latest charismatic individual that's going to lead people astray? So that, to me, this is of utmost importance, what we're doing. So are there any questions tonight or thoughts? Anything going on? We got one more thing to do. Thank you, Heather. We got one more thing to do. Because of the desire on Sunday, I made a one-page synopsis for all of us. Do you want to pass them out, Jason? One-page synopsis. We're going to go over it real quickly because we still have a couple minutes. I'm trying to get everything in within an hour, and it's 50 minutes for tonight. So that's... I was doing this for the children, but there was a raucous on Sunday morning from everybody. Hey, we want one too. We want two. So I figured I better do it. So let's go through it because what this is a synopsis. And so you have something that, whoopsie. So that in one page, you know what tonight is about. Other than we didn't cover the flag. Okay, I didn't want, because I'm really focusing on the miracles. Here we go. A dense fog and divine deliverance, August 27th, 1776. Following the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, the first major battle and the largest between America and Great Britain took place on Long Island, New York. On August 27, 1776, the battle occurred at Brooklyn Heights. If you go online and look up this battle, it also will be listed under the Battle of Long Island. You'll find both of them there. It is the same battle, okay? You can look it up and see it's all the same. The American troops are outnumbered and outskilled by Great Britain, the greatest armed forces in the world. When the battle took place, Great Britain had 32,000 soldiers, and the Americans had, after that back attack on the backside, the Americans had only 8,000. Within 24 hours, 3 miracles. This is really actually within like maybe 12 to 14 hours. These 3 miracles happened. Okay, then within 24 hours, 3 miracles took place, which saved the Americans from total destruction. George Washington's army represented the entirety of our armed forces at that time. The 3 miracles. Number 1, George Washington's men were completely surrounded by the British. Their only chance of escape was the East River. But Great Britain had 400 ships and was in the process of sailing them down the East River to cut off the Americans' escape. Suddenly, a nor'easter storm raged and blocked the British from sailing downriver. Then it became night. Late at night, they were able to start to cross. The big ships were not going to come in during that time. During their escape in the dead of night, the Americans were only able to evacuate a portion of their soldiers and arms across the East River. As day was breaking, surely the British would see what was happening, attack and kill Washington's remaining troops. But as the dawn broke, a dense fog covered both the East River and the 2 encampments, enabling a complete evacuation. 3. A British loyalist saw that the Americans were what they were doing, so they sent one of their servants to tell the British. The servant got through the American lines but was stopped by German soldiers who did not speak English, so they detained him until the morning when it was too late. So there's your 3 miracles. So actually when I'm saying 12 Stones of Remembrance, there's going to be, including this one, there's 3 miracles. So it's going to end up being like 20 miracles that you're going to have awareness of that you can share with others, whether it's children, adults, or whoever. But people need to know the history to understand that we are blessed to live in the United States of America. And
Are you going to give us a synopsis of A, B, and C?
you mean first, second, and third? Not until the end.
Well, we will get it.
Yes, you will get it. Yep, you will get it. I surrendered.
The people have all protested and voted, and yes.
They what? Yes, they yes. Yes, we the people. That's who we are. We the people. A dense, yeah, a dense fog and divine deliverance. Okay, y'all. God bless.
Thanks, Pastor.
You are welcome.
I gotta get my baby boo.
And next week, by the way, I'm going to read from a sermon that was during this time, where it will really just show what they thought of George Washington.